Please, just keep singing. Even if I can't answer, I think I can still hear you." 26-year-old Grace Hartwell whispered those words to the empty hospital room, her voice barely audible over the steady beep of monitors. She stood beside bed 347, watching the chest of 33-year-old Matthias Brennan rise and fall with mechanical precision. 3 weeks since the accident. 3 weeks since his cousin's car had mysteriously lost control on that rain-slicked highway. 3 weeks of silence from a man who'd built an empire with his words. Grace pulled the worn chair closer to his bedside, the same chair she'd occupied during every night shift for 21 consecutive days. The other nurses thought she was wasting her time. Dr. Parker had said the brain activity was minimal. The cousin, Theodore Brennan, visited twice a week with lawyers, discussing property transfers and business acquisitions with barely concealed eagerness, never once speaking to Matthias directly. But Grace saw something in the subtle flutter of Matthias's eyelids when she hummed while checking his vitals, a response too small to measure, too persistent to ignore. She'd lost her own parents to a house fire when she was 19, her mother a singer who'd filled their small apartment with old folk songs, her father who'd harmonize while cooking Sunday breakfast. Music was their language of love. After they died, Grace had stopped singing entirely, the silence easier than the memories. Until 3 weeks ago, when she'd found herself humming unconsciously while adjusting Matthias's IV line and thought she saw his fingers twitch. Now she sang to him every night, quietly at first, then with growing conviction. Old ballads her mother loved, folk tunes her father knew by heart. Sometimes she just hummed melodies she couldn't name, sounds that came from somewhere deep and wordless. Grace opened the case file she wasn't supposed to have accessed. Matthias Brennan, CEO of Brennan Industries, orphaned at 16 when his parents died in a yacht accident, raised by his uncle who'd passed away 2 years ago. No siblings, his only living relative, Theodore Brennan, 31, who'd moved into Matthias's estate 6 months ago after a failed business venture left him bankrupt. The police report noted suspicious brake failure, but insufficient evidence for charges. Theodore had been driving, Matthias had been the passenger. Theodore walked away with minor bruises. "Your cousin was here again today," Grace said softly, adjusting the blanket across Matthias's chest. "Brought another lawyer. They're very interested in your recovery timeline, or lack thereof." She paused, studying his face, strong features slack with unconsciousness, dark hair falling across his forehead. "I don't think they're rooting for you to wake up, Matthias. I think they're counting the days until they can declare you permanently incapacitated." The heart monitor maintained its steady rhythm. Grace picked up the small music player she'd brought from home, the one that still held her mother's favorite playlist. She'd been terrified to listen to it in 7 years, but for Matthias, she pressed play. Her mother's voice filled the room, warm, rich, singing an old hymn about finding your way home. Grace's eyes filled with tears as she began singing along, harmony to her mother's melody, their voices braiding together across time and loss. As she sang, she watched Matthias's face, and there, so subtle anyone else would have missed it, the smallest relaxation in his jaw, as if some deep tension was releasing. "You hear her, don't you?" Grace whispered when the song ended. "My mom. She had this theory that music lives in a different part of the brain than words, that even when everything else shuts down, melodies find their way through." She took his hand, cool and unresponsive. "So I'm going to keep singing, Matthias Brennan. I'm going to fill this room with so much music that you can't help but follow it back." Week 4 became week 5. Grace's supervisor, Linda Martinez, pulled her aside one morning. "Grace, honey, you need to let this go. He's not your responsibility. You're exhausted." But Grace couldn't let go, because she'd noticed something. Every time Theodore visited, Matthias's vitals would spike, heart rate increasing, blood pressure rising, even while comatose. His body knew danger, even if his mind couldn't process it. And every time Grace sang, everything would calm, heart rate settling into peaceful rhythm, breathing deepening. She started documenting it meticulously, times, songs, physiological responses. She showed the data to Dr. Parker, who studied it with reluctant interest. "It's unusual," he admitted, "but Grace, even if he can hear on some level, there's no guarantee he'll wake up. The brain damage from the accident was minimal," Grace interrupted quietly, "according to the scans. You said yourself you couldn't explain why he hasn't regained consciousness. What if it's not damage? What if it's fear?" Dr. Parker looked at her for a long moment. "That's not really how comas work, isn't it?" Grace held his gaze. "You told me once that consciousness is the great mystery of neuroscience, that we barely understand it. What if some part of him knows that waking up means facing whoever tried to kill him? What if he needs a reason to come back?" That night, Grace did something she'd never done before. She brought her guitar from home, the one her father had taught her to play, the one she hadn't touched since the funeral. Her hands shook as she tuned it, muscle memory fighting through years of avoidance. "Okay, Matthias," Grace said softly, "I'm going to tell you a story about a girl who lost everything and forgot how to make music, about how silence feels safer than joy when joy can be taken away." She strummed a gentle chord. "But here's what I learned. Silence doesn't protect you from loss. It just guarantees you'll lose twice. Once when they leave, and again when you stop living fully because of it." She began playing, her voice joining the melody, tentative at first, then growing stronger. She sang about grief and fear and the courage it takes to love anything in a world where everything ends. She sang until her fingers ached and her voice grew hoarse, and as the final notes faded, she thought she heard something, a sound, small, broken, from Matthias. Grace's breath caught. "Matthias?" She leaned closer, watching his face intently. His eyelids were moving rapidly beneath their lids. REM activity. Dreaming. Or waking. "That's it," she whispered urgently. "Follow the music. Follow my voice. I know you're scared. I know waking up means facing everything. But Matthias, you don't have to face it alone. I promise you, whatever comes next, you won't be alone." His fingers twitched. Then his hand moved, just slightly, but unmistakably, toward the sound of her voice. Grace grabbed the call button, her heart racing, but she didn't stop talking. "I'm here. I'm right here. Come back, Matthias. The world needs people like you, people who build things, create things. Don't let fear steal that from everyone who depends on you." His eyes opened. Not fully, not clearly, but the deep brown irises were visible for the first time in 37 days, searching, unfocused, fighting toward consciousness. "Grace!" Dr. Parker burst through the door with two nurses. "What? He's waking up," Grace said, tears streaming down her face. "He heard me. He's coming back." The next hours were a blur of medical procedures, tests, assessments. Matthias drifted in and out, each time staying conscious slightly longer. Grace stayed by his side through all of it, even when Theodore arrived with his lawyers, their faces shifting from hope to barely concealed disappointment as Matthias's prognosis improved. It was late evening when Matthias finally stayed awake long enough to speak. His voice was rough, barely audible, but his eyes found Grace with startling clarity. "You're the voice. I followed back." Grace's hand covered her mouth, overwhelmed. "You heard me? All those weeks?" He managed the smallest nod. "Couldn't wake up. Too afraid. But you're singing." He paused, gathering strength. made me brave enough to try." "Mr. Brennan," Theodore stepped forward, his smile oily and false. "Thank God you're awake. We've been so worried." "You tried to kill me." Matthias's voice was weak but certain. His eyes never left his cousin's face. "Brake lines. I smelled it before the crash." The room went silent. Theodore's face drained of color. "You're confused. The trauma." "I told the officer before I lost consciousness." Matthias's breathing was labored but steady. "Gave my lawyer a sealed statement in case I didn't wake up." His lips curved in the faintest smile. "Surprise." Grace watched as security quietly moved to flank Theodore, as Dr. Parker made a discreet phone call. She watched justice unfold with quiet efficiency, but her eyes kept returning to Matthias, to this man who'd been trapped in darkness for over a month, who'd heard her music and chosen to fight his way back to the light. Later, when the room was finally quiet again, when Theodore had been escorted out and statements had been given, Matthias reached for Grace's hand with trembling fingers. "Why?" he asked simply. "Why did you keep singing?" Grace thought about her parents, about the 7 years she'd spent in silence, about the unexpected gift of finding her voice again in the most unlikely place. "Because I know what it's like to be lost in the dark, and I know how much it matters when someone refuses to give up on you, when someone keeps calling you home." Months passed. Matthias's recovery was slow but steady. Grace was there for all of it, not as his nurse anymore, but as his friend. They'd talk for hours about music, about loss, about the courage it takes to trust again after betrayal. He told her about building his company from nothing, about the loneliness of success, about how he'd forgotten what genuine human connection felt like. She told him about her parents, about the music that had died with them, about how singing to him had somehow healed something broken in her own heart. One evening, 6 months after he'd first opened his eyes, they sat in his garden, him still regaining strength, her with the guitar across her lap. The sunset painted everything gold. "Play that song," said Matthias quietly, "the one I heard first, when I started finding my way back." Grace smiled and began to play, her voice carrying the melody her mother had loved, the one about finding your way home. Matthias closed his eyes, and this time his peace wasn't unconsciousness, it was contentment. When she finished, he looked at her with an expression that held everything words couldn't capture. "You saved my life, Grace, not just by singing, by caring when you had every reason not to, by choosing kindness over indifference, by proving that even strangers can matter to each other." "You saved mine, too," Grace replied, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave me a reason to make music again, to let joy back in, even knowing it can hurt. That's its own kind of courage." They sat in comfortable silence as stars began appearing overhead. Two people who'd found in each other's brokenness something unexpectedly whole. Not romance, something deeper, recognition. The knowledge that kindness, offered freely and without expectation, has the power to call us back from the darkest places. "Grace," said Matthias softly. "Yes? Would you keep singing, even now that I'm awake? I still need it to hear it, to remember there's beauty worth staying for." Grace's eyes filled with grateful tears. "Always," she promised, "for as long as you need to hear it." And in that moment, in a garden filled with growing things, two wounded souls discovered that healing isn't about forgetting pain. It's about finding someone brave enough to sit with you in it, offering light until you remember how to shine again. The greatest kindness we can offer isn't fixing people. It's refusing to abandon them in their darkness. It's singing until they find courage to wake. It's believing in their worth when they've forgotten it themselves.
If this story touched your heart, please like, share, subscribe, and comment. Let's spread more stories of kindness and hope together.